Thanks for coming to see me today.
Yeah, man. Glad to be
So,
here.
so I met you at the Humanist group in Nashville.
Yes.
Got to know you, had a little bit of conversation with you. For people watching that don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about your story, your faith journey, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So, I go to our regular humanist meetings and I ascribe to the general philosophy of humanism,
Hmm.
but it was kind of a long journey to get there.
Really?
Yeah. And so my journey is based on like practical application of my own philosophy, if that makes sense. And I'm not a scholar. Everything I tell you is just what I believe right now. And it's all based on this long journey to get to what I believe. But I also really kind of focus on how I started out in one place and then life is a journey, right? I'm 50 years old. So I didn't get to this humanist point in my life where I'm pretty sure of what I believe until relatively recently, within the last 10 years.
Okay.
But my background, I was raised in Michigan to my parents who were, my mom generally stayed home when I was a kid. My dad was an engineer, never went to church as a family. I was raised agnostic. I mean, that's if you're putting a label on it,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
way we were raised. We weren't ever told there's no God, but we weren't ever told there is a God. But we also did go to church like maybe once a year, not every year, with
Sure.
my grandparents for Easter. My one side, my grandparents went to church, I think, pretty regularly. And so that was kind of interesting that, that was my mother's side and she didn't really take that and like a lot of families do, pass that to the children. A lot of religious belief is passed from generation to generation.
Sure.
So I didn't grow up that way. I moved to Tennessee in 99
Hmm.
and I've always been really fascinated with different worldviews, different philosophies. I'm not an academic philosopher, but I like to think I'm an armchair philosopher. And a lot of
Okay.
what I believe is just a huge mix of all these different philosophies. And it's what works and it's all based in reason to me.
Okay.
And that's why humanism makes so much sense to me.
Okay.
So as I was coming up and after I moved to Tennessee, obviously the shiny buckle in the Bible belt,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It was pervasive, man. Christianity is very pervasive here.
So, you specified based in reason.
Mhm.
And I guess differentiating that from something other beliefs that are, say, based in something supernatural.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get to Tennessee.
I get to Tennessee, Christianity's all around, and even like my coworkers at the time, everybody around me, even some of my own family started to delve into Christianity a little bit more. And I
Okay.
read about it. And by then, I had already read a lot of Buddhist philosophy, Hindu religion and philosophy, Taoism. And I'm glad I did because I take a lot of those things and kind of blend them together into my own worldview, right?
Okay. And these weren't just like superficial reads, like you got curious about Hinduism for a weekend and
Right.
you went on more of a deeper dive.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
would dive into each one and I would apply. So everybody's familiar with the practices that people use in science, right? Scientific method and,
Hmm.
repeatable, observable results and everything.
Yeah.
So in philosophy and specifically in spirituality, a lot of that can be so abstract or so personal to a person.
Right.
You and I could both be devout Hindu
Okay.
and we could both have very different experiences with that and very different applications of that Hindu faith to our own personal lives.
And I feel like that would also be true for other religions also.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Christianity.
Any religion,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the point. Is any religion? It's like that. It's not. How many apples do I have in my basket? And you can count those and put a number on it. It's a very personal thing for everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Which I don't regard as a bad thing.
No, it's definitely not a bad
I think
thing.
anything that has value to people is probably multifaceted,
Hmm.
and some parts of it are more valuable to some
Hmm.
than other parts. Everybody values different things within that.
Right,
So,
and that's why everybody's journey is so personal to them,
yeah.
and so unique.
Yeah.
And so, as I went through and kind of explored these different philosophies and read and try to find application in my own life, one of them that I dove into also was Christianity.
Okay.
And it got to a point where I decided, and I can't remember the exact year, I'm thinking maybe back in like 2007 or 8, I read the entire King James version of the Holy Bible, Old and New Testament, cover to cover, read the
Oh,
whole thing because I didn't ever want to doubt myself or have anybody else doubt what I took away from that. You know, I've heard people use that argument, well, you haven't read the Bible, you know, or you wouldn't know because you don't read the sacred text of whatever religion we're talking about,
right.
you know, and so I haven't read the entire Bhagavad Gita, but I have read probably 75% of it. Um, and it's not for me to defend myself as much as it is to maybe defend myself from myself, if that makes
Or
sense.
at least feel like you've given it the full.
Yeah, the due diligence,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
You know, so I read that, and at one point, you know, I got married, had kids. My wife was raised in quite a religious household. She's from Tennessee. You know, her family was and still very much active in a Christian church, a Baptist church.
Okay.
And so when our kids were young,
Her family, or she is also.
well, she was,
Okay.
and her family is still. And when our kids were young, there was some pressure from outside, you know, in the family, and also from maybe her herself, maybe even myself a little bit if I take ownership of that, to, you know, our kids are being raised here in Tennessee, Christianity's prevalent. It just so happens with reading the entire Bible, the Christian Holy Bible,
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff that I agree with in it, like I do with every other religion. A lot of the basic moral principles, you know, there's a lot of truth to every one of those books. And it's not, you know, just a bunch of words that people threw together over the years. There's a reason they wrote it down, right?
Right. And a reason why they kept these words,
Mhm.
and not just, it was rainy today, and
Right. Yeah.
these were the important
The
things to
important
those
things.
people.
And then, not to dive too deep into that, but then that's how religion forms. You take these core ideas like that, and then you build a shell around them of, oh, well, here's why. Or here, and Gary, you better believe this because if you don't,
Right.
there's afterlife repercussions and all these other things,
Yeah.
you know, but we can get into that later. But for my own journey, I dove into that Christianity piece there for a while.
Mhm.
I ended up grad school. I won't name them for the purpose of this conversation, but went to a Christian school for my graduate degree.
Okay.
And and that wasn't because I wanted to. And that takes me to the next part of my journey. It's not, I said not that I wanted to. It wasn't that I chose that school because they were Christian.
Mhm.
I chose them for more pragmatic reasons, and they happened to be Christian. And I didn't love the experience because I was already finding my center again in what I call strong agnosticism.
Strong
Mhm.
agnosticism.
Yeah, so if you're familiar, and I don't know if listeners are familiar with agnosticism, but there's, you know, depending on what you read, there's two basic fields or categories, I guess, classifications, that weak and strong agnosticism.
Okay.
And so I've always felt that, you know, strong agnosticism aligns closest with, you know, what I believe.
Okay. So I'll give you my,
Mhm.
in layman's terms, my basic understanding,
Mhm.
and you can educate me. So agnosticism is essentially, we don't know.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that
In its most basic form, yes.
yeah. So tell me how somebody could either be strong or weak. I don't know. I guess that maybe I'm just going to take a stab in the dark here. Maybe it's I don't know and we can't know.
Right. That's a great guess if that was a guess, because that's really what it is. It's the weak agnostics believe that we don't know, we don't have the evidence. This is all in the evidentiary premise of agnosticism,
Okay.
evidentialism. So the weak agnostics will say we don't know, but maybe we could know, or it kind of ties with atheism and theism, right? You know,
Okay.
like if you talk about atheism, you kind of have the strong and weak sides of that too. To say weak atheism says I don't believe there is a God, and strong atheism would say I know for a fact there is no God.
Okay.
You know, so that it's kind of the same way with agnosticism. Agnosticism though you break it down to the reason piece. In strong agnosticism, you say that you cannot be a rational person and you can't follow that reasoning and be a rational person if you don't look at the evidence or the lack of evidence, black and white,
Okay.
right? Weak agnosticism means you can still be rational, but still also be biased on whether you have the evidence for something or evidence against something.
Okay.
And so that's why I think I feel that way. I feel like if you get a real strong foundation in reason behind your spiritual beliefs, you cannot prove, at least not now, and at least in again, this is the caveat being, this is my worldview.
Sure.
I don't think you can prove with evidence, repeatable, observable evidence, that there is a God. And I also don't think you can prove with that same type of evidence that there is not a God.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't prove it or disprove it, you have to suspend your judgment on it until you have one of those two.
Okay.
That's strong agnosticism.
Okay. All right.
So, and that's where I feel like it's just reason. You know, it's observation. It's like you mentioned creationists. You know, it kind of blows my mind that people to this day still feel like some of that allegorical stuff, and I don't want to be too controversial about it, but to say the Earth is 6,000 years old,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we've got carbon dating methods that everybody seems to agree on that can show how old carbon is based on half-life of atoms and molecules and things. And to say that, oh, it's accurate from now looking back 5,999 years, but something magical happened 6,000 years ago when carbon was frozen. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, and something I didn't know, and this isn't really pertinent to the conversation, but you know, we're here, so we'll talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
Something I wasn't aware of, because believers will often say, well, carbon dating is flawed and, you know, that kind of stuff, which it's not really flawed. It's that it's useful within a certain time frame.
It's a tool.
Yeah, it's a tool, and it's a tool that is good within a certain time frame, you know, and I forget exactly what that is. Maybe, let's just say 50,000 years, right?
Mhm.
So anywhere in that 50,000 years, yeah, it's a good one to use. But if you have a thought that maybe something is 400,000 years old or 200,000 years old or
2
2 million
million.
years old, you know, then you have to use other methods. And we have those.
Mhm.
So carbon dating is one method. And let's say just for the sake of conversation, let's say we have 27 other
Mhm.
methods. So when they date something that's very old, it may not be that carbon dating
Right.
is the correct one to use. It may be that it's one or several of the others. And so they use several of the others. And when they get a whole bunch of those aligning to the same thing, then they say, now we feel like we're onto something. You know, they don't just go with one,
Right.
you know, and then 16 others disagree, you know.
And that goes back to repeatable and observable
Exactly.
evidence, right?
Exactly.
And you know, like you say, it kind of transcends just aging things and the whole, you know, 6,000 year Earth creation belief. It's kind of everything if you think about religion and spirituality. And you know, diving into my own philosophy a little bit, and I think you may have heard me say this before, Gary, but you know, I always say 5 is a really small number, right? We've got 5 fingers on our hands, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's how many senses human beings currently have. You know what I mean? And
Okay.
so those 5 senses only give us so much information around us. And we have to do what we do. We have to live the way we live based on the information that we have.
Mhm.
And that's pretty limited information. I mean, it wasn't until, what was it, 1880 something, 1888, I think, when Heinrich Hertz discovered radio waves. You know, radio waves, it's like, come on, man. All that is, it's the same exact thing as light. It's all electromagnetic radiation. But there's this huge spectrum of that all the way from radio waves on one end, which the wavelength can be wider than the diameter of the Earth. That's how long one wave can be.
Hmm.
And then you've got gamma rays on the other end of the spectrum. But we only see this one tiny little band inside that. All of our visual information, all these things that we see and we consider to be evidence of things,
Mhm.
is all based on that one tiny, or, you know, with Hertz technology, radio waves, we can grow that a little bit, but we're still very limited.
Right.
You know, and our taste and our smell and those types of things don't tell us much. I don't think anybody's licking rocks, you know, to figure out how old the earth is,
Right.
you know, but the point is we have very limited input, yet we feel as human beings, I think, that we can do so much with that little input and
Right.
like solve the secrets of the universe.
Right.
And where we don't, and that's the whole point, is where we don't, where there's gaps out of
Mhm.
those 5 little senses that we have to fill those in. And what do we fill it in with?
That's so interesting.
Mysticism,
Okay.
God,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
religion, spirituality. You know, we don't know anything about what happens after we die. Nobody knows for sure. People can claim they do, but
Right.
it's because that's the end of our life, man. In my own view, you know, our brain is like a highly complex quantum computer. It's biological and not wires, right? But it's
Mhm.
still electrical impulses.
Yeah.
And when we die, that computer shuts off
Right.
and that's it. But it's such everybody dies and a lot of people are afraid of that. And so what do we fill in for that mystery? Well, afterlife. And well, afterlife, by golly, you better live this life right if you want to have a good afterlife. And then you get into power conflicts and struggle and a
Right.
lot of other motivation for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Nobody wants to think that the party's gonna go on after I'm not here.
Right.
They don't wanna think,
Yeah.
no, there's just a
Or you're
final
not
curtain.
invited.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a
Mhm.
final curtain closing,
Mhm.
and then you'll not be here. I
Right.
like to tell people when they ask me about the afterlife, I'm like, "Well, I don't think that there is an afterlife." And I think that that's gonna bother me at that point the same way that it bothered me for the millions of years before I got here.
Mhm.
I was completely unaware,
Right.
and I think I'll be
That's
completely
exactly the
unaware
same.
then.
Mhm.
But it makes this life more valuable, and it makes this time more precious. So this
And
is the big show. We're not in the green room waiting for the big show.
mhm.
This is the big show.
That's exactly right. And that is what leads me, that whole line of reasoning is what leads me to my humanist beliefs. Right?
Okay, so just to make sure I'm tracking you here.
Mhm.
So you get to Tennessee. You're immersed in Christianity. Um, did you become a Christian at that point?
So that's a complicated answer because if you would have asked me at that point, I would have said yes. But for as much as that might have been lying to you, I think I was lying a lot more to myself. I wanted to be there was family and social and academic pressure to be Christian in
Yeah,
my life at that moment.
yeah,
And so when I was going through grad school at that Christian university, I had to I had to take Christianity and weave it into a lot of the papers I was writing for my master's degree. You know, what's the Christian aspect of this?
mm,
How, you know, my degrees, it's an MBA, it's business. So it's like, well, how is business influenced by Christianity? What influence should Christianity have on business?
mm,
And I felt very frankly, and actually don't think I've ever really talked about this much in my life, but it was almost like I was lying even while I was going through that school, which is why I didn't want to name the school.
sure,
Um, you know, I did well in the school, but it was a struggle for me because I felt like I was lying and I was taking things out of the context I thought they wanted to hear
yeah.
and say them in there. And I said, I got to be done with this. I was very uncomfortable for a few years going through that. And I'm like, I just need to stop pretending. And, you know, it went against my upbringing. It
Yeah,
went against everything I learned in my childhood.
to not be authentic like that?
Well, yeah, to not be authentic. And, you know, like I said, I started out my life, you know, 20 something years just being raised agnostic.
Yeah,
And so once I started to identify as Christian, I got a lot of, you know, like they say, social media likes give you the dopamine. You know, it was kind
yep,
of like
yep,
those personal spiritual likes, the family, the community, these likes give me that dopamine of, yeah, we're Christians together, man. It's cool.
right,
And like
right,
even some of my family that used to be agnostic started to also identify as Christian. And that pendulum has kind of swung past it a little bit now, I think. I won't
yeah,
speak for them. You know, some are more into it than others.
okay,
But with me, you know, it's like I've got to get back to my authentic self. And it's not that I don't think there is a God, although I don't believe there is one personally.
mhm,
I also can't prove that there's not. A lack of evidence doesn't prove that something doesn't exist,
Sure.
you know? So I don't believe there is, but I also don't have evidence that there is or is not.
Yeah. So you hung out in that space for a while.
The Christianity
Yeah.
space, yes.
Got your fill
Mhm.
of that. And then what was the next step? Was the next step humanism?
Yeah, so humanism is something that I've always kind of identified with anyway, because it doesn't really matter whether you're agnostic or atheist or anti-theist or even religious in a way. I shouldn't say religious, I should say spiritual. Religion to me, by definition, comes with a lot of the dogma and the teaching with it. You can be spiritual without being super religious.
Okay.
But when you're spiritual or agnostic or atheist, all those people can still identify a lot with what humanism teaches us or what it has become over the years.
Okay. And what drew you to humanism as opposed to, say, I've had my fill of Christianity,
Mhm.
but you didn't feel a longing for or a search for a different explanation for supernatural or a different,
Right.
what was the pull directly towards humanism? And then and after that, I want to get into what is it actually,
Yeah.
but what was the draw originally? Was it just curiosity?
Not really curiosity, it's more like if you boiled everything else away, the stuff that I wasn't comfortable with, humanism was what was left behind.
Okay.
So if you take away the dogma, you take away the spirituality, you take away the rules of religion, you take away all these other things,
Hmm.
you have what's left. And so I may have mentioned in other conversations to you, I'm even less of an expert on anthropology than I am on my limited expertise on philosophy, but it's interesting to me. And so thinking about anthropology, humanism to me is an outcome of anthropology without the religion. And I don't even know that I've ever said it that way before,
Yeah.
but we as human beings, I believe, started out early evolution before even Homo sapiens were its own species. And we were kind of independent creatures, according to a lot of anthropologists looking back, kind of like how a lot of animals are now, independent. We still had some family units and mothers still cared for their young and everything, but we started to hunt and gather together. And then roughly 1.5 or 2 million years ago, we started to cook with fire. And once we started to cook with fire, our meat and the things that we cooked became less harmful to us. We killed parasites and they
Hmm.
became more beneficial, more nutritious. But what that did is it brought people together around a campfire. Not everybody would create their own fire. It wasn't easy. So not everybody created their own fire, but they came together to sit around these fires. And where I'm going with that
I
is
mean, who doesn't like the smell of a good barbecue?
exactly right.
That's gonna pull them in.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm vegan, but a good Vidalia onion on a
Yeah.
barbecue, man, you can't beat it. But so as these people came together,
Yeah.
we evolved, I think, in the last 1.5 to 2 million years to where we don't exist on our own. Nobody does.
More social
Yeah.
creatures.
And I mean, I've had people say, okay, man, I'm a survivalist. I'm off grid. Screw society. Dude, you're not on your own, man. You did not grow the cotton that then you spun into the clothes that you're wearing and create, the factories that made the metal in the truck that you're driving. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
every human being relies on other human beings for our existence. Everything.
Yeah.
That's the type of animal I think that we are as human beings. And so humanism, without diving in yet into too much of what it is, the reason I believe kind of what it tells us is that it really holds to that. We're all human beings. And so I think that we can have a moral code and we can have a definition of right versus wrong without having to have a God tell us what that is or some other higher being that nobody has ever really personally met.
Right.
Unless, if you read the Bible, certain people have met God, but you know,
Yeah.
that's to be discussed in a different conversation.
Sure.
The accuracy of that, I guess.
So the draw
But
to humanism was essentially when you when you cast away the supernatural or
mhm.
and a lot of the dogma and rules, when it when you boil it all down, you feel like humanism is what's left.
Right.
We're social creatures. Let's care for each other,
Mhm.
and we can affect our world in that way.
Yes.
That's the essence.
That's the essence of it at a real basic level. And,
Sure.
you know, so you've started to get to know me a little bit. One of the other things I weave into it, and it's a hodgepodge, man. That's the way I think. Like even humanism doesn't have every answer. No one philosophy has every answer. Neoclassicism, none of it has uh, any claim to knowing everything about humanity or the way we should live or how we have lived.
Right.
Right. So I weave a lot of other things into it. And one thing that I'm a huge fan of because it answers so much for me and makes my life better. I don't call myself Taoist by any means, but Taoism in the way is a great way, I think, to tie one philosophy into like what we learn from humanism into just kind of a laid back, we're all human beings, let people do what they're going to do as long as they're not hurting anybody else.
Mhm.
Right. And just kind of go with the flow with things, you know. And yes, we do need to chart our course and we need to steer our future to some degree as human beings. That's why we have leaders, you know. But even those leaders, I think, could benefit from cutting a lot of the BS out of it, a lot of the dogma,
Yeah.
and just saying, okay, at our core, we're all human beings. And if we read what the Tao teaches us, we just kind of go with the way, the path, right? We just kind of go with that flow and not try to be the branch in the river that's trying to dam things up and try to resist things because the river's always going to win, right? The flow of our universe is always going to win. Every single person alive today is we all have the same outcome. We're all going to die.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? None of us are permanent. None of us are here forever. And so I think there's a lot of stuff we can learn from philosophy like Taoism, um, maybe a little bit from Buddhism. You know, I don't ascribe to a lot of the Confucianism stuff because that's really super rigid and
Yeah.
a lot of the rules, but there's elements out of each one of those that I think are
That you find
the
value
answer.
in.
Yeah, and human beings aren't stupid, man. We've been around for a long time, and that's another piece of us, you know, being a community. We learn from each other and we learn from our past, right?
Right.
And so all these different philosophies, it's interesting to me. I think of things in the perspective of what if we could get in time capsule, go to the future. If we go 5,000 years in the future, you and I sitting here on a podcast is going to seem super primitive. And
Sure.
you know what I mean? And talking about this stuff, they're going to be like, yeah, can you believe that human beings had 85 different philosophies and none of them agreed with each other? And you know what I mean?
Right.
Because those answers may become more and more clear in the future. We only know what we know now.
Right.
And I try to be mindful of that I by no means know everything. I don't think I even know a fraction of it hardly,
Hmm.
you know, but what I do try to do is boil it down like we were talking about in and how do I affect Gary?
Yeah.
How do I affect the rest of the world? You know, how does Gary see me? Am I doing something that impedes Gary's prosperity? And by prosperity, I'm not talking about just financial prosperity. I'm talking
Hmm.
about your happiness, your health, your well-being.
Right.
Am I doing anything to impede that? No. All right, then we're good there. I would take it another step further though and incorporate some benevolence into that too. I
Mm.
think because we are a collective social animal, human beings, I think we have a responsibility to show some of that benevolence to other members of our same species
Right.
and other species as well. But, you know, I should not
It's
stop at just leaving you alone.
hmm
I think I have a moral and a human obligation to try to show a little benevolence towards you. If I
yeah.
can help you,
I
I
don't
should
want
probably help you.
to. It sounds like what you're saying is you don't just want to not make my day bad.
Right.
If you can in some way, you'd like to improve my day
Mhm.
just a little, just slightly.
Yeah. You know, they say jury duty is everybody's, what do they call that? Your civic obligation or
Okay.
whatever, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
or your responsibility,
Yeah. Your civic duty.
civic duty, you
Yeah.
know. So we could say, yeah, that's civic duty. That's because somebody said it is, right, or whatever.
Okay.
But if you look at that philosophically, yeah, it's our civic duty because that's how we make the decisions, right? That's how
Hmm.
we elect the leaders that make our decision.
Yeah.
So if you can't really argue against civic duty for doing that, you also can't argue that, you know, none of us live all on our own on an island, unless you were born and raised by a pack of wolves and you've never met another human being, you rely on other human beings.
Right.
And because we rely on other human beings, I think that we have a moral obligation to be kind and to be benevolent toward those other human beings.
Yeah.
That's just my personal belief.
I think you've touched on a couple of things that you find in humanism. Um, I brought the 10 commitments, living with humanist values, and so this is kind of a snapshot or a framework
Mhm.
for so. And I think what you've described is empathy. Let's see,
Altruism.
altruism, a little bit of humility.
Mhm.
You know, um, so you would you
Peace
say,
and social justice. You can't
right?
have peace and social justice without some benevolence and some kindness.
Yeah.
If you are unjust to a group socially,
Hmm.
that's the opposite of being kind and peaceful with them, right?
Yeah. So let's move into this a little bit
Mhm.
because this is really why I wanted to talk to you today, and I'm glad I appreciate you sharing your story with me and
Sure.
kind of the path because it gives us a good framework to how you arrived at where you're at. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. So so now you've boiled it all down to what is important. At the end of the day, we're all humans.
Mhm.
So you start looking at humanism. So what is the essence of humanism? And I can give you my basic understanding
Yeah.
because uh, I've been hanging out with you guys and some of the other humanist groups for going on a year.
Mhm.
Um, realize that you're part of this humanity. Do your best as a part of that. Treat others with empathy, some compassion, some understanding. Be the best human that you can be.
Mhm.
Am I off base? Am I leaving out major?
No, I mean, that's really it in a nutshell.
Okay.
It goes back to we're talking about the collective social creatures that we are, right?
Right.
It's humanity.
Okay. So I'm going to read through some of these. I'll read through all of them. Um, and I'm just going to name them. There's sentences afterwards, but I'm just going to give
Sure.
the titles. So tenet number one, empathy, showing other people empathy, critical thinking. You touched on some of that.
Important.
Uh, ethical development. That's worth a little pregnant pause
Yeah.
after that. Ethical development. In other words, give me your impression. Ethical development.
Yeah, so that's extremely important, and I'm glad that's included in the 10 commitments for humanism because ethical development is never done, right? It never stops because the human population, the human race is always changing. And as we change, we need to make sure that our ethics align to our current state, right?
Mm,
Ethics now are different than they were in the 16th century or you know at the time of Jesus or the time of the ancient Egyptians that built the pyramids. The ethics evolve with human beings. So that's important for us to do that. And you mentioned the boiling away, of all the dogma and all the other teaching. I think we need to keep a laser focus on that in order to understand what we need collectively as human beings
mhm.
ethically, and then set our ethical code based on what we need and not just what we maybe felt like we did need or maybe what tradition tells us we need, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, in my career, I work a lot in change management, and that ethical development is change management for humans as human beings.
Okay. I talked to somebody one time that was going through a big corporate change. Companies were merging, that kind of stuff. And somebody said, "Hey, if somebody ever asks, because we're merging these companies and that kind of stuff, if anybody asks, hey, on step number 17, um, why do we do that way? And if the answer is because that's the way we've always done it, that's not an
It's
answer.
wrong. Mhm.
We need to figure out why it is that we're doing it
Yeah,
because it could be that we need to change and
exactly.
need to make an adjustment.
Yeah.
So you're saying that's an ongoing process, and I like that. Peace and social justice. That's something to strive for. Service and participation, help out where you can.
Benevolence, yeah.
Yeah. Altruism, um, helping others in need without hoping for rewards. So just helping somebody just for the sake of being kind.
and that is humanism. Again, also at its core, it's lifting up the people that need it
Right.
because we're humans. You would not want to have a few bad decisions or whatever lead to, we can call it bad luck, whatever it is, and end up on a street
Mhm.
or end up, even if you weren't homeless, end up in a bad situation that you yourself as an individual can't pull yourself out of.
Right.
And I think we should be able to rely on our fellow human beings to help us out of that. You
Right.
know, we could take that other stance of, well, it's each man for himself or whatever it is they say,
Mhm.
you know, and if you got some bad luck, well, sorry to hear it, man. You know, you might just have to die or you might just have to suffer for a while. But that also goes, even if you're not humanist, that goes against pretty much every major
Right.
human religion.
Right.
So it's like we know in our core that that's important.
Yeah. I don't know, off the top of my head, I don't know of any religion that refers to pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps and, you know.
Right. Yeah. Every man for himself,
Right,
says
right.
the religion.
So there's altruism, there's humility, don't
Mhm.
think too much of yourself. Environmentalism, okay?
Mhm.
So, I will take care of the earth and the life on it. So I think that's, in other words, just being mindful. That doesn't mean that every humanist is what you would call tree huggers or environmental activists
Mhm.
or vegans or, anything like that. But I think environmentalism, I mean, the Boy Scouts, one of their things is leave no trace,
Yeah.
you know?
As a hiker, that's my mantra,
Right,
you know?
right. Leave no trace. Have a lot of fun, but don't leave a mess when you leave. I think that's the beginnings of environmentalism. So,
Well,
um,
and so environmentalism is important too because these all tie together. You know, social justice ties right into environmentalism, you know, the altruism, a lot of these things tie into it. And it's, you know, it doesn't mean everybody has to go hug trees, like you say, in a
mhm,
in an environmental protest, or not everybody necessarily needs to recycle, although I think they should, but that's a flawed that's a whole different podcast right there
mhm,
with
yeah,
the reality of recycling today. But what we do need to do is make sure at its foundation that this earth that we all live on, every human being is an organism, and we all live on this ball, right? This is
mhm,
our habitat.
right,
And so even if you're not the most diehard environmentalist, I think you and every other person in the world have this responsibility, if we're going to be responsible to each other, to not destroy our habitat. It's as simple as that.
right. And I mean, as of right now, we've crammed it with nearly 8 billion
And
people
growing.
and growing very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
So,
For real, man.
so, global awareness, the same thing. Realize that you're part of a bigger thing, um, and responsibility. So you have a role to play in all of this.
Mhm.
So empathy, critical thinking, global awareness, service, and participation. What I don't see in here is any sort of a deity.
Right.
I don't see anything that you have to uh, pray to or devote your life to. I mean, this is basically just a, hey man, this is a good starting point for being a better human. Respecting people, realizing that you're part of this, a part of humanity,
Yeah.
and you have a role in it. And this gives you a starting point into where to kind of take hold of that and take responsibility for your role in the hive, so to
Yeah,
speak.
exactly.
So, yeah, I don't see dogma. I don't see, and I think some people could be really compassionate, really passionate about, um, 8 of these areas, but you know, m- maybe they don't do that much service and participation.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't. You know, maybe they're disabled. But they can do a lot of things, but they're not going to come mow the grass for somebody or paint the house or build the house or whatever. But they can do a lot of other things.
Well,
Um,
you know, part of that is recognizing that we are all human beings, right? So there's 8 billion people, there's 8 billion different personalities out there,
right.
and everybody is different in how they approach things and their motivation behind things. So I think you can be humanist without maybe actively exercising every one of these commitments,
Hmm.
but you can still believe it. You know,
Right.
it's kind of like, yeah, I think you could be say Jewish without going to the synagogue on a regular basis, or you could be
Abs
Christian without necessarily going to every Sunday school. You might not do all the things,
mhm,
but it reminds us the importance in humanism is just our responsibility to each other. And here's the thing, like, you don't have to believe any of it. You wouldn't be humanist if you don't, but you don't have to believe any of it. But I look at things like if you swing something and push that needle into like the end of its spectrum,
mhm,
as an example, it's a good exercise. If you don't believe any of these things, you push that needle to the opposite. If
mhm.
you're totally selfish and you're totally just using up this earth for yourself and its resources, and you're being not altruistic, but like almost evil to people
Yeah,
and doing things and killing people, if you don't really have any of these beliefs and you don't have any morality, you could say, well, it's okay to kill people as long as it serves me. I can just go kill the guy standing next to me,
right.
So, but common sense and experience tells us that even if we don't put it into words or write it on paper or write it in a philosophy book,
Mhm,
common sense tells us as human beings that's not the right. It's an extreme view.
right.
And so if that's an extreme view, then that tells us, regardless of the dogma or the religion or whatever spiritual belief you might have, it tells us that there are some basic things that we all just have this natural tendency to agree on.
Right.
And
But
that's what our morality should be based
you don't have to subscribe to some ideology
on. Right.
to be a good person,
Exactly.
to care about your fellow human.
Yeah. And we know that we should be a good person because we know that we shouldn't be a bad person. We don't have our whole human civilization is not built on people killing their neighbors every single day.
Mm,
Yes, it happens, but as a whole, that's why we're still here. That's why we still continue to flourish as
exactly.
humanity. So,
Because we've learned how to survive as a group, as social creatures. Okay, so one last thing, and we'll wrap it up after this. I wanna ask you if there's anybody that couldn't be a humanist. In other words, could I be liberal and be a humanist?
I think so, yes.
Could I be conservative and be a humanist? Could I be atheist and be a humanist? Could I be Christian and be a humanist? I haven't found I haven't found any sort of um, classification or group that someone might be in that would prevent them from saying, "Yeah, and I'm a humanist."
Mhm.
You know, you could be Republican, Democrat, atheist, believer, vegan, meat eater. You can be any of those things and still care about your environment, care about people, want to do your best, help out where you can. That's it. There's not a, you know,
I think there's only one prerequisite, and it's right in the name. I just think you have to be human.
okay.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
it sounds oversimplified, but you're right. I think no matter what your affiliation is with other things, as long as you believe the tenets
Yeah.
of humanism, you can call yourself humanist all day long.
Right.
Now,
And you are one. Why not value the others also?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, someone may argue, well, humanism became its own philosophy, and within that philosophy, there's like this framework or this definition, and it doesn't align with theology. They could say that.
Mm.
But to me, again, and that's kind of baking Taoism a little bit into my worldview.
Yeah.
It's like, let's not worry about that crap, man. Like, just go
Right.
with the flow. Like, if somebody is the most devout Hindu in the world, or somebody is a lifelong evangelical Christian, and they want to call themselves humanist, let them call themselves a humanist. To me,
Right.
that's the kindness and the altruism of somebody.
Yeah. But you know what? This is the Big 10 as far as humanism goes.
Hmm.
These form the base, right?
Right.
The most important. And what I didn't find in here was anything that said, don't worship
Right.
however you want. Um, I didn't see anything that said, that you can't be involved in, anything that are good practices. I
Right.
mean, in fact, there's not any don'ts on here,
There's not really any do's either. They're just beliefs.
Right.
The humanism doesn't tell you you have to go do something. You have to go stop somebody from laying a gas pipeline to, in your environmental commitment to being a humanist. Nobody's
Mhm.
saying you have to do anything.
Right.
These are the values. All it is just a collection of values that are shared by many different major religions. But I think the value of calling it humanist is that you don't need those other religions to still have this collection of values and to put them into action,
Yeah.
your own action, without a call to action or a call to inaction or a prevention of we forbid you to do this or that.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just love your neighbor, man.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to.
Well, I appreciate you going through some of these things today, and I hope that we've given some people some clarity on what it is to be humanist. It's not a worship of humans. It's not a negation of however they choose to worship. If they do, if
Hmm.
they believe in any sort of, it's not. It's none of those things. It's just simply let's value each other and
Yeah,
let's try to make this place a little bit better for everybody.
exactly.
That's all there is to it.
And if any listeners are out there and they have very specific Christian or other spiritual beliefs and they want to become part of it or learn more, there's humanist groups out there you can join.
Yeah.
You can look it up, you know.
Yeah, you and I are both part of what we call HAMTN, which is the Humanist Association of Middle Tennessee. But most cities have a humanist group, and you can all these days with the internet, you can always reach out and find some like-minded folks. Okay, so before we get out of here,
Mhm.
so we've talked about humanism and who can be and who can't be, and kind of the core tenets of it and that kind of thing. But in actually living it out and fleshing it out, that kind of stuff, you're involved, and you just started another group that you were telling me about.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, sure. So it's a brand new group, just getting it kicked off. It's called the Benevolent Friends of Middle Tennessee. I hope that I can drop the words Middle Tennessee from it in the future and have like a Benevolent Friends group with different chapters.
Okay.
That's all future stuff. To me, it's grassroots, man. It's right here in our local community in Middle Tennessee right now.
Yeah.
Got a website. It's benevolentfriends.org. It's a .org. We're a nonprofit. I haven't got 501c status on it yet, but
Hmm.
we're going to work on that. But the whole mission of the group is just to bring folks together. We're super chill, bring folks together and try to execute our mission, so to speak, of promoting peace through intentional kindness.
Intentional kindness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we live in a world where there's a lot of division, and you can take away all the political division and all these other types of division, and we still don't have true peace and harmony. We never really have in the world. There's been wars for as long as human beings have been around. But I'm a big advocate of peace, and I think that the best path to get there is just through kindness. And that sounds a little bit simplified, oversimplified maybe, but I think if we can be intentionally kind and if we can get that to become a cultural norm, then the leaders that we elect are also going to be kinder people and incorporate kindness into the decisions that they make. And when they start doing that, we start to see the world change a little bit.
Okay. So you started this group,
Mhm.
and it's basically just one being yourself, eh, but congregating with other people that are also on that same mission. And not only am I going to do something, kind to make your day better, but I'm hoping to promote the
Exactly.
you going forward from there
Yeah.
and spreading that. It's almost like a pay it forward.
Kind of. Yeah, I don't really use that term because that has kind of almost this cliche vibe to it, but, at its core, that's really what it is, but again, it's intentional, so I wanna start by bringing people together and showing them kindness. Like, one of the first events we're gonna do is gonna be called, Great Beats and Free Eats, and it's
Okay.
gonna be at, Barfield Crescent Park in Murfreesboro. That's where a lot of our events will be, is around the Murfreesboro area, Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I'm just buying food, man. I'm gonna buy food for the community.
Yeah.
I've got a big, like 100-person pavilion rented,
Yeah.
and we're gonna take a bunch of bongos, congos, drums, spoons, salt shakers, whatever makes a sound. We're all gonna get together. We're gonna listen to a little message about kindness, right? But
Yeah.
then everybody's gonna eat for free while supplies last.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, within reason.
When is this happening?
I have to look at the date. It's on our website, but I
Okay.
believe it is September 28th.
Okay.
It's a Saturday.
All right.
And so everybody come, bring friends, whatever. But what we want to do, so I think giving people some free food, bringing them together
Yeah.
is one simple act of kindness.
Mhm.
But the message I want everybody to leave with
Mm.
is not only is it good to be kind to other people, but we need to develop a culture where we're kind continuously to people. Because I use that, my website says it, but kindness is kind of like ripples in a pond. You can throw a pebble in there, it's going to radiate, it's going to touch everybody around it. But at some point, those ripples kind of fade out.
Mm.
You get back to, flat pond or whatever,
Right.
unless you keep throwing ripples, or if you start throwing bigger rocks,
Right.
you get these waves of kindness. So I think of kindness, intentional kindness, as we need to reach this critical mass of kindness where everybody is a kinder person. And those kinder people are the ones that are interacting at home, school, office, out in the community, wherever they're at. They're
Yeah.
interacting with other people, but they're also the people that are voting. They're the people that are making our decisions, our elected leaders. When they are kinder people, there's just more justice for everybody.
Right.
If there's something that I might do as a mayor, for example, that might be a controversial decision, or maybe not even controversial, just say it's changing some signs on a highway, some whatever it is, it could be simple stuff. If I'm intentionally kind as I'm doing that, I'm actually being mindful of how does this really impact people and what can I do to make life just a little bit easier for people?
Man, I love your ripple analogy there, and the fact that they fade, so you keep throwing them in there.
You have to.
Man, if more
Yeah.
people did that, what an effect that would have.
Hmm.
If there were multiple pebbles being thrown in all the
From
time,
every
and
direction.
all those ripples were converging,
Yeah.
we're so divided these
So
days.
divided.
But hopefully, your organization will help bring some people together and show some people that there's a way to walk, um, keeping other people in mind intentionally.
Intentionally. Just
Yeah.
love each other, man. If you look at an enemy, be like, that guy looks different than me, or I know he's in a different political affiliation than me, or he's way older than me or way young, but we're different. I don't like that about him.
Right.
Well, we need to get away from that and be like, that dude's another human. What do I love about that guy?
Right.
And when you look at that, you could actually feel like something change in your outlook and your perspective on things.
Yeah.
And then you want to be kinder to that person because you're looking for your common ground. So it's recognizing diversity, celebrating diversity, but it's also about celebrating the commonality that we all have as human beings too. And that's a major focus of the new group.
Man, that's really exciting. I'm going to come on the 28th. I'm going
Yeah.
to join you guys down there. I'll help spread the word.
Yeah.
And
We
man,
got the website. And we also have, it's on Meetup.
okay.
So just look for Benevolent Friends on Meetup.
Hmm.
Benevolent Friends of Middle Tennessee. We're on there.
Okay. And give your website.
Benevolentfriends.org.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Benevolentfriends.org. I'm going to check it out.
I
Thank
hope
you
do.
again for coming in. I'm so glad that you're in my circle, man.
Yeah, for real.
All right,
Same.
buddy.
All right.
See
Thanks.
ya.